There are certain holidays that feel untouchable. Safe, comforting. Mother's Day is usually one of them. Flowers wrapped in paper, crowded brunch restaurants, children carrying handmade cards covered in glitter and fingerprints, phone calls, family photos, the same soft commercials playing every year reminding people to call their mothers before it's too late. It feels warm, predictable, but underneath all of that is something older, something tied to grief. Because long before Mother's Day became a commercial holiday, the idea of motherhood was deeply connected to mourning, death, fear, and the supernatural. Across different cultures and different centuries, some of the most disturbing stories people have ever told were stories about mothers. Mothers searching for lost children, mothers warning people of death before it happened, mothers returning after they were gone. And maybe that sounds a little bit strange, but when you start looking into the origins of the holiday itself and the folklore surrounding motherhood throughout history, there's an unsettling pattern that starts to appear, one that feels strangely universal. Tonight, we're going to explore the darker side of Mother's Day. The episode is less about internet horror stories and more about the real history surrounding motherhood. The folklore, the mourning, the rituals, and the strange traditions that existed long before the holiday became commercialized. Because the truth is, Mother's Day did not begin with celebration. It began with grief. The modern version of Mother's Day is usually traced back to a woman named Anna Jarvis. Most people have heard that part before. What usually gets left out is the atmosphere surrounding the creation of the holiday. Anna Jarvis did not create Mother's Day because she wanted greeting cards and restaurant reservations. She created it after the death of her own mother. Her mother, Anne Reeves Jarvis, had spent years organizing what were called Mother's Day work clubs in the mid-1800s. These groups were formed to help improve sanitation and care for sick children in communities where disease spread quickly. At the time, child mortality rates were devastatingly high. Illnesses that would be treatable today often became fatal. Mothers lived with the constant awareness that children could disappear from their lives without warning. And then came the American Civil War. The war left entire communities shattered, families divided, thousands died. Women who had already spent years caring for the sick suddenly found themselves surrounded by mass grief. After the war, Anne Reeves Jarvis organized gatherings intended to reunite former Union and Confederate soldiers. The goal was reconciliation, healing, but beneath that was mourning, a generation trying to figure out how to continue after catastrophic loss. When Anne Reeves Jarvis died in 1905, her daughter Anna became consumed by the idea of honoring mothers. She viewed motherhood through a far heavier lens than the modern holiday suggests. To her, mothers represented sacrifice, endurance, devotion, and in many cases, grief. The first official Mother's Day service was held in a church in West Virginia in 1908. People often describe it as heartfelt, emotional. But if you imagine the atmosphere honestly, it probably felt far heavier than the modern version people know today. A church service dedicated to absent mothers, women who had died, families remembering people they could no longer speak to. That emotional core never really disappeared. It just became buried under commercialization. Ironically, Anna Jarvis eventually grew to despise what Mother's Day became. She hated the greeting card industry, she hated the marketing, and she believed the holiday had been stripped of sincerity. At one point, she was even arrested while protesting a Mother's Day event. And there's something strangely sad about that. The woman who created Mother's Day spent years watching it transform into something she barely recognized. Almost like a memorial that lost its meaning over time. But even beyond the history of the holiday itself, motherhood has always carried a darker presence in folklore, especially when grief becomes involved. Even people who do not believe in ghosts tend to remember stories that involve mourning, because grief already feels haunting. It changes houses, changes routines, changes the atmosphere of places. Anyone who has lost someone close understands that strange feeling of absence becoming almost physical. A room suddenly feeling wrong. Hearing footsteps you know are impossible. Reaching for your phone before remembering there's nobody left to call. Historically, mothers were often associated with spiritual intuition as well. There are countless stories throughout history involving mothers sensing disasters before they happened. Premonitions, dreams, sudden panic moments right before accidents. Stories where someone claims their mother somehow knew something was wrong before anyone else. Some people see those stories as coincidence. Others see something deeper. Either way, they appear constantly. And not only in modern storytelling. Even ancient cultures linked motherhood with supernatural awareness, protection, warnings, sacrifice, and death. The line between nurturing and mourning has always been strangely thin, especially historically, because for most of human history, childbirth itself was dangerous, extremely dangerous. Modern medicine creates distance between us and that reality. For centuries, pregnancy carried the possibility of death for both mother and child. People lived close to mortality in ways that feel difficult to imagine now. That fear shaped folklore, it shaped religion, it shaped the stories people whispered to each other late at night. And eventually, some of those stories became terrifying. A lot of supernatural folklore was built around vulnerability. Parents trying desperately to protect children from disease, starvation, harsh winters, accidents, or unexplained death. When people lacked scientific explanations, fear often became the supernatural. That does not make the fear less real. If anything, it makes it feel more human. There's another reason these stories continue to survive. Most horror loses power once people stop relating to it. But fear surrounding family never disappears. Every generation understands it, which is why stories involving mothers often feel emotionally heavier than other paranormal legends, even when they sound impossible. Spiritualism became wildly popular during the 1800s. Seances, mediums, spirit photography, entire rooms filled with grieving people desperate to believe death was not permanent. Many of the people attending seances were mothers who had lost children, or parents hoping for one final conversation. Some mediums were obvious frauds. Others became famous for producing strange photographs supposedly showing ghosts standing behind living relatives, transparent figures, faces emerging from the darkness, hands appearing on shoulders. Today, most of those images can be explained through photographic tricks, double exposures, manipulated negatives, but understanding the technical explanation does not fully remove the emotional weight, because underneath the deception was real grief. People wanted desperately to believe the dead could still hear them, and honestly, that desire has never gone away. Even now, people talk to gravestones, leave voicemails on disconnected phones, text numbers belonging to people who died. Grief has always blurred the line between memory and haunting. When you start paying attention, mothers appear constantly in paranormal stories. Sometimes as protectors, sometimes as warnings, sometimes as something far darker. One reason these stories endure is because motherhood already carries enormous emotional weight. The relationship between parent and child is tied directly to survival, protection, dependency, love, and fear. So horror built around motherhood tends to feel personal very quickly. Even urban legends reflect this. Stories about phantom women searching for children, ghosts reappearing near roads after accidents, mothers sensing danger from impossible distances. There are even modern paranormal studies built around baby monitors, security cameras, phones picking up voices. Technology changed. The themes stayed strangely similar. And maybe that's because fear surrounding family adapts easily. Every era creates its own version. During earlier centuries, people feared spirits stealing children. Now people fear strangers online. The emotional structure underneath remains familiar. there's also something psychologically unsettling about the idea of unconditional protection failing. Most people associate mothers with safety, so stories involving danger inside families feel uniquely disturbing. That's why films and folklore centered around motherhood tend to linger emotionally. They touch something foundational. And some of the most disturbing stories are not violent at all. They're quiet. A mother hearing footsteps upstairs after her child has already moved away. Someone setting an extra place at the table out of habit years after loss. A phone number still saved long after nobody answers it. Those moments feel haunting because they are familiar, not because they are supernatural. There's a certain type of sadness that horror rarely captures correctly: absence. And motherhood is deeply tied to that kind of emotional fear. Mother's Day is advertised as universally joyful, but for many people, it is one of the heaviest days of the year. People grieving mothers, people grieving children, estranged families, complicated relationships, people who never became parents, people trying to become parents. Entire emotions hidden underneath cheerful marketing campaigns. That emotional contrast is part of what makes the holiday feel strangely eerie when you think about it long enough. A day centered around love and appreciation also quietly becomes a day where millions of people revisit loss. And maybe that emotional undercurrent is why the darker folklore surrounding motherhood continues to resonate. Because beneath the flowers and cards, the holiday still revolves around absence as much as presence. Who is still here? Who is gone? Who people wish they could speak to one more time. Even Anna Jarvis herself spent years consumed by preserving the memory of her mother. That longing sits at the center of the holiday, whether people realize it or not. Maybe that's why so many ghost stories involve mothers. Not because motherhood itself is frightening, because grief changes the way people experience the world. A person can continue hearing someone's voice years after losing them. A familiar perfume can suddenly stop someone in their tracks. A room can feel occupied simply because memory refuses to leave it alone. And throughout history, people try to explain those feelings through folklore. Ghosts, wandering rivers, women searching for children, spirits lingering inside homes, warnings arriving through dreams. The stories change depending on the culture. The emotions underneath them stayed remarkably similar. Different cultures describe those emotions in different ways, but the core feelings rarely changed. Love mixed with fear, protection mixed with loss. Mother's Day eventually became softer, commercial, predictable, but its origins still trace back to mourning, to remembrance, to people trying to hold on to someone after they were already gone. And maybe that is the most daunting part. Some of humanity's oldest ghost stories were never really about monsters. They were about grief refusing to disappear. If you still have your mother in your life, or someone who filled that role for you, this is the kind of story that lingers a little longer than most. Maybe it brings up the idea of reaching out, checking in, saying something you've been holding on to for a while. And if they're no longer here, it might bring someone else to mind instead. A grandmother, a guardian, a family friend, someone who stepped into that space and gave you care without ever needing a name for it. Mother's Day often gets framed as a single day of celebration, but for a lot of people, it's tied more closely to memory than anything else. The people we miss, the people we still have, and the people who quietly became that role in our lives without ever asking for recognition. Take a moment for them, in whatever way feels right to you.